Welcome back, and this is going to be an exciting lesson because we're going to make something happen whenever we interact with our content within our game board. So we know that we've set up this memory game, and whenever we click them, we're firing off a function called pickCard. So we need to create that because now all we're doing is throwing errors whenever we click those. So let's open up our editor and let's create this function. So the first thing also that I wanted to do is I want to add in another variable. So this is a default one, and this one is going to check to see if the card is flipped. It's going to start out at -1 because our array starts out at 0. So we know that if it's -1, then we haven't actually selected anything from the array that we're sending over here as we're picking through. So that was what we needed to do to set that up, because now we can identify if pick card is a new card as we set this. So let me show you. So this is going to be basically the tile index that we're passing through. Because remember, we're passing through the value of x as we loop through here. We started at 0, so every one of these has its unique value assigned to it, all the way from 0 to 11. And again, that's why we're starting with -1, so that we know that that value is going to be assigned to the first card, and we haven't assigned anything if we're sitting at -1. So let's first do a value of tile index and to the console, and another console log. So another value that we're looking at is going to be the card flipped value. So we'll log out both of those. So what we want to do is we want to put a conditional statement to see if the value of card flipped, is greater than or equal to 0. So that will exclude the -1. Basically allowing us to identify if we've picked our first card. And we're also going to need to make sure that our flipped card, so if it is greater than or equal to 0, that we're not able to pick it again. So that's another thing that we need to keep in mind as we're going over, that we're actually going to be able to pick 2 different cards, because even though these are going to be flipped over, we're still going to be able to identify them. So there's quite a lot to do in this lesson, and I'm going to run through it fairly quickly, and then we're going to reassess it at the end of the lesson. So we're checking to see if it's greater than 0. So basically what that means is that this is where this is the second card, I should say. And this is where we can do all of our checks and so on. So I'm going to console log out, and I'm going to put second, and then also let's do card flipped, so that we can identify that this is a new card that's flipped, and we're going to have to put in a value in there. So let's do our else. So we know that this one is the first card. So we know that this is the first card flipped, and we need to have actually some functionality where we're putting the value of card flipped, and we're putting the value of tile index into that card value. And then next, let's just console log out so we have some consistency here within our console as we see what's happening. So card flipped is there. Let's save that, go back out, refresh it, hit start, and open up the console. So now when I click it, and pick card is not defined because I put a capital there. So that was my fault. Go back out, refresh it, and let's try this again. We see that this is our first card, and this is our second card, and of course we can keep picking, but it's always going to be the second card. So we need to run our check, run our loop, and lock off any additional cards to be picked up. So the other thing too that we need to make sure is that the user isn't clicking the same card. So we have to make sure that this value is actually, before we do our second card, that the current tile index is not equal to that tile index, and if it is, then we know that the user's trying to pick the same card. So we need to make sure that tile index is not equal to the flipped card, or we're just going to keep picking that same one. So now And then there's also another one that we need to run a check to make sure to see if it's actually in the flipped cards as well, because we don't want the user to continuously be able to continue to flip cards as well. So that's another thing that we need to consider. So maybe just make a note of that. Check if it's already flipped. And maybe we can even do that before we do anything else, that we can need to check to see if this particular one is already flipped, and if it is, then we want to disable the ability to click it. A number of ways that we can do that. We can do it by class, we can remove that, and so a number of different ways to do that, or we could just put it into an array, which is more than likely what we're going to do. So if the tile index, the one that we picked up, is not equal to the one that's flipped, so we know that the user's selected a new card. Second card is new. So now we can set it up in a variable, and we can do a check to see if they actually match. Variable, second card, and we're going to equal that to whatever the tile index is going to be. So now we've got two cards flipped over, and we're ready to do a check to see if it's a match. Check for match. So also what we want to do is we want to actually flip the cards over as well. So we want to update the source of the cards to reflect the actual image. So this is the actual flipping over of the card information. So let me add one more thing in here, and we'll just do this. I'm gonna output the this object, and also because we're already selecting it, we can do this source. So and that's how we're just gonna simply update the source of it. So we see that this source, we're getting undefined. So we're gonna take a closer look and see why it's not being defined. So just do this for now and hit start. Go back out here, and we see that we're getting that whole Windows object. So we're not actually getting the item that was clicked being passed through. So basically for the image, we know we need to pass the this object directly within our function. So I'm going to just call it t for now. We're going to output t, and I do need to update that element. So we're doing that, and we're going to pass this as well. So now let's refresh it and try this again. So now we should be able to pick up that card information, and we see we've got all of that information, so we can grab that source. So open up your editor again, and we can update the source. So we've got a value for t source, and basically once we flipped it, we can update the source. So we can do t source. So let's update the source, and then next we're also going to show you how we can add that interval timer where we flip the card back to the background. So these are all tiles the same. So we're going to need to create another array for this. So right now t source, because we're passing over the element information within the handler. So we're picking that up, and that's where we're able to get the source. And because we've identified the source, we can update the source with the image, corresponding image to the tile index. So let's match that one there. So the source is now going to be the same one that we built the tile array out of, because we know that this is a corresponding number. So go back out to the end there, save that, and so whenever this card is flipped over, we're ready to flip that one and this one as well. This is going to be our first card that's flipped over. So let's see how this works. Go back out, refresh it, click 1, click 2. And actually the path for this is going to be images, because we've got all of our tiles within the images. So just got to make sure that we're setting the source to the tile images, and now let's try that out. So refresh it, hit start, and we can see that now we can flip over the tiles. And unfortunately, we're still able to flip everything over. So this is not ideal, and in the next lesson, I'll show you how we can build this out. But essentially, so our game is starting to come together. We're storing all this information. We're able to flip tiles. We know which value of tile we're flipping over. We're getting those images and information. And now all we need to do is create another array that's going to hold those solutions and keep a count of those as well. And then we're going to utilize that to continue our check to see if the user found a match and continue to build out the gameplay. So that's coming up in the next lesson.